What's up, guys? So today on the podcast, we're going to be doing another installment of the Rules for Jiu-Jitsu series that we've been doing on the podcast with you. And today's is going to be a rule sort of based upon some experiences that I've had in relation to competitions and rolling and everything else. And I'm going to give you specific stories, but I've made all these sort of mistakes and errors, both that ended up sort of working out for me and not working out for me. In the gym and off the mats and everything else. And so again, hopefully this is helpful to you guys with your training and just giving you an idea to chew on for the day. Also, just wanted to give you guys a heads up. So we are going to be running the pre-sale for our not our podcast, but I'm going to bring up the dates for the Jiu-Jitsu rash guard and shorts made by Epic Rolls. So we're going to be running this order from December the 13th, 2021. I got to put that date on there. Otherwise, someone will send me an email in like 2023 and say, "Hey, Chew, what gives?" This actually happened with an email once where someone was like they went to their email a year later. I swear to God, I was like, hold on, dude. Like he was like, "Hey, Chew, is this sale still going on?" Like that was from a year ago. It was from 2017. What are you doing? Anyway, but December 13th, 2021 till the December 27th, December 27th, 2021, we're going to be running a pre-order for the rash guard and shorts for Jiu-Jitsu. And so again, the rash guard it's a nice rash guard. I've been wearing it, playing around with it. We've made a couple adjustments, mainly just to the location of the logo. And the shorts, I love the shorts. Again, if you guys have listened to me talk about Matt's shorts at Epic Roll, they're my favorite shorts to wear. I tend to not want to wear any other shorts because they're just comfortable. They have a drawstring and they don't have any Velcro. So there's no Velcro messing around, and I really like them. So again, keep an eye out on those. But if you guys want to get them, you can go to chewjitsu.net, and I've got my little Shopify store. You can place your order in for those right now until the 27th. And also, if you guys ever want to check out any of Matt's gear and check out any of his design work or the gear and stuff that he makes with Jiu-Jitsu, I like his stuff. He's at epicrollbjj.com. Promo code is Jiu-Jitsu, and you'll save 15% on the order with him. And with the shorts and the rash guards, there's no discount code. It's just I'm giving them to you at a good price, and we're just going to roll with this pre-sale, and they are what they are. But I'll be throwing in probably some bonuses, as I tend to do for you guys that take it. I haven't figured out what that bonus is going to be yet, so be on the lookout for that around. But anyway, moving on. Also, big thanks to our sponsor, Charlotte's Web. Charlotte's Web is getting ready to send us some sprays right now. So again, they're always kind of coming up with new products. They're coming up with a CBD spray. Is that correct?
Yeah, it's like a nighttime spray. Yep.
Okay.
It's really kind of small, portable, and easy to kind of travel with and all that stuff. So we haven't tried it yet, but they've said they've had really good success with it.
Nice. And one of my police officers at the gym, he was telling me the other day that he loaded up when we had like the Black Friday sale.
Yeah.
And he loaded up on a bunch of CBD stuff. And I was talking to him, and again, for a lot of you guys that are in careers and jobs that have like a zero tolerance for any of that stuff, it can be a struggle sometime. He said he like ate like a bunch of gummies one night, like a bunch of the CBD gummies. And then he had to like he got a random drug test the next day.
Oh Lord.
Yeah. Luckily nothing popped dirty or whatever. But he was excited to see that they had these, like the CBD or the THC free stuff out there. So again, for any of you guys that want to try CBD, but you're maybe in a situation where you can't because of the tolerances that you're exposed to, check out their THC free CBD at their website at charlottesweb.com. They have more information on that particular product if you're curious about it with your job and everything else. But again, if you want to get some of their CBD products, you can go to charlottesweb.com. Promo code is Jiu-Jitsu. You save 15% on the order on any of the products that you get from them as well. And also thanks to our sponsor, Paik at become-stronger.com. He specializes in making cool stuff out of metal. And one of the things that he makes is maces and hammers and all these different odd object implements that you can use for exercise. He sent me and Eugene both a mace about a month or two ago, and I've been playing around with it, and I like them. It's fun to do different movements, because a lot of times I spend most of my time doing traditional lifting, like bench press, squats, deadlifts, all that stuff. It's fun to mix in some different odd object stuff from time to time. And there's some interesting things that you can do with those type of implements that you can't do with regular weights. And so again, I know that a lot of people like to mix in maces and kettlebells and things of that nature into their workouts, when they're working out at home or wherever. And if you'd like to check out some of the stuff, he has a few different options there. One of the things that's kind of cool about the maces that he makes is that they're loadable. You can put more weight in there with water or whatever you want to put into them. You basically have a little screw on the top and you can fill it up. The one that I have is already pretty heavy, but then you can put some water and stuff like that into it, make it a little bit heavier. So again, you can adjust the weight a little bit, but it's a nice implement to have if you're a home workout person, or if you're a person that's basically trying to get a object or a piece of weight equipment that you can use for multiple different tasks. It's a little bit more versatile than, say, just like a one weighted dumbbell or whatever. But again, if you want to check out some of this stuff, you can go to become-stronger.com. Promo code is Jiu-Jitsu, and you'll get 10% off your order. And then also, guys, if you think it would be a good idea to have a jiu-jitsu game plan or some strategies for implementing techniques into your game, then you should go to my website at jujitsu.net/join, JOIN. And on that webpage, I have a option to subscribe to my newsletter, the Chew Crew newsletter that I send out daily, Monday through Friday, most of the time. And when you subscribe to that, you'll also get a set of ebooks sent to you, 2 of them. One is a jiu-jitsu game plan ebook, which will detail just a basic listing of my game plan and how you can make your own, which I think is a good idea for anybody that's a competitor or just wants a better read of their jiu-jitsu game. And then the other one is a drilling strategies ebook. And that's an important one where if you want to add a little bit more deliberate practice to your training, it's a good idea to look at that ebook, which it can give you some strategies to do that, whether you have open mat time to do extra drilling, or you have like 2 days a week that you got to squeeze in there and you don't have that time available. There's options for both. And so you can check that out at jujitsu.net/join. And if you would like to get access to a buttload of extra content from the podcast, including interviews and sort of pieces with the guests that we've not aired anywhere else, that haven't been posted anywhere else, with actionable tips related to your jiu-jitsu training, you can go to patreon.com/the Jiu-Jitsu podcast. When you subscribe to that membership, you then get access to several years worth of content that we've been making with the different guests. There's also some content that's not related to the podcast, like narrated rolls and rolling videos, breaking down different ideas, is among other things. And so if you want to get access to that, you can go to Jiu-Jitsu or patreon.com/the Jiu-Jitsu podcast. And guys, with that said, let's jump into the podcast. What's up, guys? So today's sort of lesson for jiu-jitsu, which will obviously have implications off the mat as well, is sort of an idea about not judging a book by its cover. And you can sort of take this as either an under or overestimation of people, or an over or underestimation of yourself. And I have some fun stories to share with you guys about this sort of thing in action, because I think this is something that we're all guilty of at times. Like when we see people, we make snap judgments. There's that term from, what was it? From Malcolm Gladwell's book Blink, and he calls it thin slicing, which is basically just like a lot of times we make snap judgments based upon, and he's talking in this case about art, where like people will look at a statue and they could tell the statue was off or that it wasn't an authentic one by making a quick snap judgment in the blink of an eye, right? And they couldn't necessarily articulate what it was, but they could just tell something was off. And in jiu-jitsu, a lot of times we can do this. If we watch someone show like a really bad self-defense technique, we intuitively know something's off, and we're like, what's wrong with this? And then you have to think about what it is. Well, we do this with people, right? We make snap judgments a lot of times with people and with situations based upon the appearance of things, and you have to be careful with this. And in jiu-jitsu, there was a point, one of my favorite stories of me overestimating myself and underestimating my opponent was there's a guy named Joe Bays. And if you follow competitive grappling, especially in my area, you probably have heard the name before. You might even be super familiar with the name. But Joe is a really, really good leg locker. Now, he's so funny because he's a killer. Like he'll take your leg and, he can catch you very well. And he's super, super skilled, but he's so unintimidating to look at, right? To
Mm.
meet him. He's very soft spoken. You know, his voice is relatively low. Like I remember like going to seminars and people were like, "Hey Joe, could you speak up?" You know, because he just kind of talks like this and he's
Mhm.
very quiet, you know, to himself. And so I was at this competition in the middle of like BFE Kentucky. I don't know why this particular tournament had one. It was in like the middle of nowhere, Kentucky. I'm like, why did they have it here? And I mean, you know, it's not one of the main cities. I mean, because basically, if you're in Kentucky, you got like Lexington and Louisville, maybe Paducah. But other than that, it's like you don't really have any big cities. And this was like right in the middle of nowhere, about 2 hours out of Louisville. Get to the tournament, and it had a decent showing. But I remember I didn't have anybody in my division to compete against at the time. I was a purple belt, and so I was in the like expert division. There was no experts at my weight class. And so they said, "Hey, did you want to go up a weight class?" And they said, "We have one guy in that weight class if you would like to go up against him." And they show me this guy in front of me, and it's Joe. And Joe at the time was, you know, maybe 225 pounds, a little bit on the chubby side because Joe's not a huge guy anyway. And I looked at him and like, you know, he seemed very nice. In my head, I'm thinking, oh, about to kill this guy, right? 'Cause, who is this guy? You know, this kind of like chubby guy. I'm about to kill him, you know? And I remember our first, we had 2 matches, best 2 out of 3. First match, I go out there and I'm like, I don't respect anything that he's doing at all. And within 20 seconds, maybe 25 seconds, he had me in a heel hook. And I remember because he pulled half guard, I put a little squeeze on him. Like, I'm about to squeeze the crap out of this guy. And then he rolled under me, got me in a heel hook. And I remember I was so surprised that he had me in a heel hook that I sort of stared at him and I was like almost the term that I would use, just deer to headlights, like what just happened? I'm looking at him and I remember him having the heel hook sunk in and he goes, "You okay?" You know, and he's got this submission, you know, and I said, "Yeah, let me go ahead and tap out real quick." Right.
Yep.
And then they had best 2 out of 3. He beat me the second time because I didn't have anything for him. And the match wouldn't have gone any different than it did on that day, whether I overestimated or underestimated myself. But in that first match, I definitely overestimated myself compared to Joe, and I paid for it pretty quickly. And I remember I ended up training with Joe the following week. I remember we trained together for like 2 or 3 hours and had some really good training sessions. Learned a lot from training with him because I was able to understand what he was doing to me. Now, sort of a flip side to this is there's been periods where I've underestimated myself. And I think many people will relate with that feeling of like, you know, underestimating your own abilities. You can sometimes hear this with people who have feelings of imposter syndrome, right? That's very common because you underestimate what you can do and what you're capable of. And a lot of times if you're someone that sort of undersells themselves in general terms, then you tend to be someone who you probably don't actually have a good read as to who you really are because you probably look at yourself in sort of a certain way. And I remember going to a competition one time as a white belt. And this was the very last white belt competition I did. I show up at the competition at my particular weight class. I was on weight and my friend was not on weight. So we had enough people so that we had 2 people in almost every division as a white belt, including these heavier divisions that I was in. Well, my buddy was overweight and he was a weight class lower than me. So that put him into my weight class. And so we already had 2 in my weight class. And so someone needed to move up. And so my coach was like, "Hey, you're the best one out of the 3. So you're going to go up." And I remember I was so frustrated. I was so angry. It ended up being a blessing in a way because the division that I went to was like half the size. Like the guys in the weight class that I was supposed to be in, I mean, there was like, I want to say there was like maybe 30 or 40 people, competitors. It was nuts. And then I went up to one and there was like, I think like 16 of us or something, 8 to 12, something like that, you know, like a normal three or four matches to win kind of bracket. And I go up to this heavier weight class. So now I'm in like the heavyweight, which I want to say it went up to like 220 something, maybe 230. And so all these guys are bigger than me. And I remember in particular, there was this one guy who he was a big fella, like big square jaw, you know, he's got the big old jaw, big shoulders, broad shoulder, very muscular, and he looked mean as can be. And I remember thinking like, God, I don't want to go against that guy. right? Give me anybody else in this bracket. I don't want that dude. And in the second round, I went against that dude. And I remember locking up with him. And then all of a sudden, like, my body starts to take over. And all of a sudden, I'm doing great. And I started to gain more and more confidence throughout that match. And I ended up submitting him eventually with a rear naked choke. But I remember going into that match, and then for the first minute or two, I was a little thrown off, and I wasn't as aggressive as I could have been.
Yeah.
Because I was overestimating what he could do and underestimating what I could do and how good I was and how big he was and all these things. And again, I think if I would have gone in there and with normal sort of mindset, I would have been better off for it. But it worked out okay. But again, that's just an example of these happening multiple times. And I was even thinking about one of the students at the gym who I had watched. Here's the thing, like, I can roll with people and I can generally get an idea of who's better, right? Again, I can't explain to you necessarily why all the time, but I can be like, yeah, that guy's a little bit tougher than that guy, and I bet he could beat him if they rolled together. You just kind of feel it. It's an intuition. I had a blue belt in the gym years ago, and I remember watching him sometimes roll with people who would have like higher belts on, right? And watch him struggle with him, even though in my opinion, he should have been able to beat them, because we would have visitors come in and I'm like looking at him rolling with a guy that I had no trouble with whatsoever. I'm like, why is he struggling with that guy? I think he got spooked by the belt. I've seen a lot of people do this before. And then I remember watching him one day come in, and there was a brown belt that visited, but it was a no-gi day. And I remember the student rolling with that brown belt and actually kind of getting the better of him. And the brown belt wasn't a slouch. He was a pretty good brown belt. But again, the blue belt was a bit bigger and was able to do some stuff on him. And I remember afterwards telling him, oh, yeah, that guy's a brown belt, by the way. And his ears, like, his eyes popped out. He's like, oh, really? Like, I was I was almost like glad I didn't tell him that he was a brown belt beforehand, because I bet he would have like laid down a little bit easier. Because in his head he would have been like, "Oh, this guy's supposed to beat me, so I'm not really going to go for things." Because a lot of people do this. I know that like a lot of people will sometimes. I just answered a question the other day where someone was like, "Hey, Chewy, how should I roll with my coach?" Because he's a black belt and I'm a white belt. I'm like, you just roll with him. Because a lot of times people get so worried about like the person's skill that they don't even focus on themselves and what they could do. And so that's a problem. And so again, this is an idea. Now, off the mats, you can think about what this sort of implicates, right? For instance, I have students whom, if you were to meet them, you would not like by looking at them, you would not get an idea as to who that person really is, or how intelligent that person is, or how much of a bookworm that person is. And I even used to be this way, where I remember I would go to fights. And people would look at me, and sometimes I've always been kind of a clean cut guy. I'm not like, I don't have any tattoos. I don't look mean. I haven't served any time in prison or anything like that. So I would go to these MMA fights, and you'd have all these guys that were just mean looking. They'd have all these crazy tattoos, and they'd have scary nicknames and all this stuff. And, I would go out there and beat a lot of these guys, but it would be funny because they would put me in there. And the crowd would like, I remember there's a fun story. I was going into a fight once, and I went against this guy who was like, he looked like an action figure. He was just shredded to bits. And I've never been a shredded guy. I'm big and strong, but I've never been like super duper lean. And if I do get lean, it's like a fight to get there. I don't stay there for too long because it's a fight for me to get lean at all. And I remember I fought this guy. When I'm going into the ring, there were these guys that knew me from different previous fights and had been around the fight community at the time. And so I'm coming to the ring, and they're up in the stands making bets with their friends, right? They're like, I got this guy and I got this guy. Well, I come to the ring, and, I get in the ring, and I'm kind of this like pasty looking like white guy with no tan, and I'm not super muscular looking. And I remember the guys next to him, he said that they were like, oh man, I'm putting my money on the dude, the ripped guy. And they were like, okay, well, we'll bet like they were betting like several $100s for, like, yeah, we'll take that bet. We'll put our money on the pasty white guy. And, the pasty white guy won that fight. And, I just think it's just an interesting thing. And then a lot of times, like, even before I started doing the YouTube stuff, right? Like a lot of people, when they would get to meet me, would get to be surprised that, like, I'm a bit of a bookworm, because they think of it as a fighter. They think of someone
Sure.
that's like doing all this stuff. They think about these things. And so it's just a general idea, but I think it's important because you have to sort of, it's better to go into situations, I think, a lot of times without preconceived notions of what something is, who someone is, how things are going to go. And
Yeah.
I think a lot of times we get ourselves in trouble when we do that, right? Like when we sometimes if we undersell ourselves and we don't perform up to our abilities because we go into it with a preconceived idea of the way things are going to go, or even when we meet people, we go into these relationships with people with a preconceived notion of how things are going to go with this person because of who we think the person is, rather than just allowing things to come and let them happen as they may. And I think that's a useful thing for jiu-jitsu. And I think it's useful off the mats as well.
Yeah, I agree. That's a thing that I do feel for me personally that if I overestimate my abilities and I'm more confident, like I feel like I'm better than the other basically, if I look at them and, you know, like you said, they look out of shape or something, whatever. Or, you know, they have even if I don't know their belt, but maybe I feel like I'm more physically fit, or I feel really confident against that person. And I overestimate, I think I do better because I'm more, I think I go for more things. I'm more confident in my techniques. I believe in my techniques more than versus like I'm going against somebody that I know is, or maybe I'm like a blue belt going against a brown belt or something. I'm gonna be more reserved. I'm not gonna really show my game as much. I'm gonna feel like they're gonna be better than me. So I feel like for me personally, like my confidence is one of those things that I always kind of fight with a little bit. As you know, I feel like when I feel good about myself, I feel like my abilities kind of follow through versus the other way around. So I don't know your opinion. Do you think there's one, if you had to choose one way to be, oversell yourself or undersell yourself, what would you prefer?
I think there's it's different for everyone, you know, because everybody's a little bit different, and even with these ideas that are here on this podcast, right? Like the idea is to take them and use them and see what they do for you. It's interesting. So I don't necessarily like going into situations overconfident because I want to be on edge a little bit, because I always want to remind myself that this person can beat me. If I don't play right, if I don't do what I'm supposed to do, they can beat me, because I've had some situations where I was very relaxed and overconfident, and that didn't serve me very well, because when I went in there and I was too relaxed, I didn't respect the fact that this person may be just as good as I am. But at the same time, when I go in and I'm underselling myself, I don't do very well either. I think there's kind of a middle ground where I like to go into a competition with my morale high and my confidence and my techniques high from rolling, you
Yep.
know, knowing that I'm good, right? And I have to remind myself, like, because that's another thing too, because I struggle with this too. I am in a situation where, generally speaking, like when I go to seminars, just as an example, I generally don't have any trouble rolling with any black belts, you know. The only black belts I really have a lot of trouble rolling with, um, and when I say trouble, I mean like I can't even hang with them, right? Like maybe let's make that distinction, because I have lots of black belts that I have great training with.
Sure.
But when I'm saying like trouble, I'm talking about like where I don't even feel like I'm in the same class as them. That typically only happens when I go with like really high level guys, like say a JT Torres, or you know, a Muhammad or someone like that. Like those are the guys where I'm like, you know, I'm not in this class. You know, they're above my league. But generally speaking, otherwise, like I roll with plenty of black belts. And I'm like, yeah, I belong here. I'm fine. Um, but I like to go in with, you know, morale high, my confidence high, but completely like a blank slate as far as what's going to happen. Like I don't make any sort of bones about like what's going to happen. Like when I'm getting ready to compete, I remind myself that I'm really good at jiu-jitsu, and that, you know, you're going to have to be very, very good to beat me. It's just a fact. It's not a me feeling good about myself and making an affirmation about what could happen someday. It's just what is right now. I'm very good at jiu-jitsu, but I like to go in like clean as a whistle and basically just like, let's see what happens. And that's the way that I like to compete, because when I go in like that, where I'm not really thinking about the other person, is when I perform my best. When I'm just sort of thinking about like, how am I going to use this technique on this person? Or when essentially sometimes when I just turn my brain off and go, you know, and that's probably the best times, because there's these weird moments in competition and even rolling sometimes where when I have my best moments is when I'm not really thinking about anything at all. and I go out there and compete. And then afterwards I get off the mat, I'm looking at myself. I'm like, I watch the videos. I'm like, who is this? You know, like that was cool. Like, how did I do that? Like sometimes I'll do moves I just made up on the fly, or sometimes when I'm rolling in the gym, it's the same way. Sometimes I'll be in a good state of mind, and it's like things are happening and I'm not really thinking about them at all. I'm not making, you know, judgments as to whether or not I'm feeling good or whatever. I'm just going. And so somewhere in the middle of all that is where I like to be.
Yeah, I think what you're referring to is kind of, and we talked about it on a previous episode, is a flow state. You're kind of in a loose flow state where, you know, your body's kind of intuitively moving and responding and reacting and doing what it needs to do based on the inputs that it receives. And you're not really, I think, the expectations, and that's kind of what I'm getting at. You know, for somebody of your caliber that's been training for a long time, that usually is the best guy in the room. You know, I think you fall on the side of, like, I could overestimate my abilities sometimes, but some other people, you know, like even myself, I feel like I'm always, I need to always build myself up. Like I feel like I tend to be on the other side.
Mm-hmm.
I don't give myself enough credit. I don't, you know, I always am very hard on myself. So I think, like, for me, I've always been that way. I've always been very critical of myself.
But
So
hard on yourself in what way?
I'm critical. I'm critical of myself. Instead of, you know, I'm very easy. I'll easily do negative self-talk. Like I'm prone to negative self-talk, and I'm less likely when I do something well to give myself praise or like build myself up. I will, but I veer towards that. If I had to, like, to put a scale to it, I'm 60% on the side where I'm like, and that negative self-talk, you know, for me is like, I use it as a motivator, but also can hinder you, because then you kind of beat yourself down a couple pegs, and then you may not perform to your abilities because of that, or you may feel that other people are better than you when really they're not, and you're just your own person. For me personally, it was like in soccer. When I played soccer in high school, it was funny, right? When I played in, like, for my team, like in school, I was kind of not great. I was mediocre. When I played like club soccer, when it wasn't as important and meaning as much, man, I was all over. I was doing great. I was just like, because I didn't really care. I didn't feel the pressure. I didn't put the pressure on myself to perform a certain way. So that was one of my things, is my mental side of I was and athletically, I was always fairly athletic and physically in good shape. It was never that. It was, a lot of it for me was the mental side of things. So that's just,
but see right there, like that's again, sort of that's an issue of like making judgments upon it, right? Like, you know, just like it being open to what comes, right? Like, so just like you make no judgment on whether this person's going to be better or whatever, you're just going to go after them and do what you got to do.
Exactly.
You know, when things happen, you can't make like a judgment on it as to like, and beat yourself up with it. I mean, you can want to do better, of course.
Absolutely.
And someone should always want to do better, and you should want to improve and be the best and show the best abilities that you possibly have. But at the same time, I think we get into like a trap, because I was talking about it this morning in the gym, where, you know, when we come into the gym, we're we were doing it. Here's what was going on. We were doing a drill where I was having the students, and I think I've talked about this before on the podcast. I had one person in offense, one person in defense. The offensive person could do whatever they wanted to, but they could only finish with leg locks. The defensive person could defend, but they could not use their hands. Now they could use their hands to post on the mat and move around, but they could not grab the person, and they could not defend with leg locks with their hands. They just had to use their feet, pummeling and everything else. And the reason why I was doing it was, one, to bring hyper awareness to the feet, because just like an injury, sometimes if we injure our shoulder, we get really good about protecting it, right? Because we bring that awareness, that consciousness towards that part of our body. And the whole point is, like, let's say if you're going up against a leg locker, you should be bringing a certain amount of consciousness to your feet and being a sort of understanding of where they are in space at all times. If you're up against someone that's a leg locker, right? And then the other thing is to break people of not wanting to get submitted, because you're only using your feet to defend, and they've got all their weapons. They're going to submit you at some point. And so to break people, because a lot of people are resistant towards tapping, or resistant towards losing, and resistant towards, quote, doing bad, right? But that's the issue too, is because when people come into the gym, and this is where I'm getting with this, we come into the gym and we've been conditioned from the outside world that there's some sort of right or wrong way to do things, that there's a good and a bad, there's a positive and a negative towards things. And sometimes things are just happening, right? There's not a good or a bad, it's just happening. And I think that a lot of times we do a disservice to ourselves sometimes when we sort of place judgments of positive or negative or good or bad on them, when it's just something happened. You made a mistake, fix it, and it's fine. It's not good or bad. It just is. And I think that because I know that when I was younger, I had a hell of a time looking at my mistakes because I would always think that they were good, or excuse me, always bad. And it was hard for me to look at myself doing something that I thought was bad, or me doing something that was bad, or me doing the wrong stuff. And it was such a mental thing, right? And once I stopped sort of putting those judgments on them, I could learn a lot more from them. And at the same time, because I'm not worried about doing the bad thing or the wrong thing, I'm not so scared about going for things either, because if I screw up, I'm like, so what? It happens. Instead of going into and placing some sort of judgment upon it if it doesn't work out.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's a thing that a lot of us have to overcome, because it's so conditioned to ourselves from the outside world around us.
Yeah, or even assigning blame to like blaming yourself, or
Oh yeah.
because if you assign, it's like I've that's something I've worked on, is not like blaming. Like, say somebody, you get caught in a submission, don't blame yourself or blame this, or just like you're right, like it happened. What can I learn from this situation? What can I learn from this setup? Is there something that can be? And for me, usually like those painful experiences, like we talked about, are the things that really jumpstart my my process of focusing and correcting things. So like, I mean, I've learned to kind of appreciate those negatives, and not really assign too much blame, and just not be too hard on myself. So that's something I've worked on. But what do you recommend, Chewy? Like, I was going to ask you, man, like white belts, obviously you're the lowest person, on the totem pole. You're kind of least skilled in most cases, with the occasional wrestler that's a, national champion. But what do you think as far as like, how do you avoid being spooked by others? Like, how do you, like, say your student comes to you and they're a white belt and they just don't feel like, they just don't have any confidence. So what do you tell them, like, to maybe not look at that blue belt and be scared of them, or a purple belt or what have you, and kind of play their game?
Well, first off, going back to what you were just saying a second ago, like, don't perceive things as like negative or positive. They just are, right? Like, so there's some negative things in the world, right? Like,
Sure.
Like some guy that's trying to molest children. That's a negative thing. That is not a good thing at all, right? But when we're talking about jiu-jitsu and the game that we're playing, if someone beats you, it just happened. So what? Well, like, you perceive it as negative, but for them it's a positive, right? Like, so which one's the right one? There is no right one. It's just a thing. It just happened. And who's to say that the person's never supposed to beat you? They're training hard too. And so again, you just have to remove that sort of bullshit mindset of it, where it's just like, it just happens.
Yeah.
Like, don't overthink it too much. And the only reason I know this is because I had the mindset that negative mindset of like, I'd beat myself up. Literally, I used to have a picture on my phone of me getting choked by someone, right? They put me in a guillotine choke, and I had it on my phone. So every time I brought my phone up, as an old flip phone, I would have it staring at me getting choked. And then like the message, like the welcome message when I opened my phone was like, "Go train, asshole," right? Like, it was that. And the thing is like, I could train myself stupid, but at the same time, it doesn't mean I was going about it the smartest way, and it also doesn't mean that I got any better because of it. I trained really hard, but like, as I've gotten older, I realized like there is training harder. You can't be lazy, but you do have to train intelligently if you want to get better. If you truly want to get better, you have to be very deliberate with your practice if you want to improve. But going back to the spooked by others thing, right? So spooked. Again, why are you going to be spooked if you don't care about the outcome so much, right? You're only getting spooked because you're placing some sort of judgment upon their belt and over or underestimating what they can do, or what you can do. And then you're getting worried because then a lot of times what we've all done is you go against someone and you're like, I want to go for this move, but what if this happens? Or what if they're like, it feels like I could go for a guard pass, but what if I go for that guard pass and they do this? Or what if they're letting me do this and they're just going to bait me into something?
Yeah.
Who cares? Go for it. Right? I mean, that's how you learn. And again, I think the problem is when you sort of put too much thought of it. It's like the idea from like, what is it? Judo, right? Like mushin, no shin, no mind.
Yeah.
Right? Like just don't think about it. It's not a thing. But again, when we view everything in that view is like, it's a test. There's a pass and there's a fail. There's a good and a bad. There's red ink or there's going to be the black ink that gives, it's like, it's that kind of stuff. And so we're doing jiu-jitsu where like you're rolling with someone and you feel like it's like a test for something. Which there's a test to yourself every day.
Sure.
But again, it's to you, it's your own personal journey that you're on. So it doesn't matter about them. And if things don't go well, then so what? But if you are independent of the outcome, right? If you're not worried about what happens so much, if you want to improve and you want to go for things, but you're not worried about failing, well, then why would you be spooked? Because the outcome's not going to bother you. You're not going to take it personally. We get spooked because of of taking the things that happen and we take them too personally, or we assign them as negative or positive. So it's my rant on that.
Well, some of it's like the value and the importance that you place on jiu-jitsu. If you spend all these hours and all these days training, you put such a value on it because you want to be good at it. Obviously, you want to be successful at jiu-jitsu. And so I think that like when it's something that's really important to you, you covet it and you cherish it and you want to be good at it. I think that's you almost like the stakes are higher because it's something you care about. And when it's something you care about, like loss is painful, more painful in that aspect.
Yeah. But again, it's one of these things where, maybe this is something everybody has to learn, right? The more you try to hang on to something, the more it sort of gets repelled away. You get in your own way. Absolutely. I mean, you get in your own way with it. Like if you again, if you really want to do well, but then you're so worried about doing well because you love jiu-jitsu so much and you covet it, right? You said that word covet. Like I covet it. Isn't there a commandment like thou shalt not covet something? It's like if you hold on to it too tightly, you're just going to get in the way.
Right.
And so that's the problem. And so maybe this is something that everybody just kind of figures out eventually, because there's stages to it, right? Where eventually you get to a point where, okay, you've achieved some stuff. What now? Right? Like, what are you going to do now? Okay, you climbed up the ladder. Okay, what are you going to do at this point? And I think it's a lot of times at that point where people start to sort of throw off the baggage and the bondage of the expectations and the feelings that they have towards it being a positive or negative thing, or the need for what they consider to be a positive outcome. Yeah. Right. I think that's the thing. And I get it because again, I've dumped a lot of my life into this thing and I don't want to be bad at it. I want to be exceptionally well. Right. And I'm going to work my tail off to do it, but I'm going to enjoy that. Right. I'm not going to, because, I remember like when I was younger, when I would put this baggage on myself, it didn't make the training more enjoyable. And I didn't perform any better than I did. In fact, I performed worse. Yeah. As I sort of dump that baggage off and allow myself to just enjoy the training and go after it and train hard, I do better because of it, mentally and physically.
Yeah. It reminds me of, we talked about like the belts getting promoted. Some people freak out and they get like, oh my gosh, so much more pressure, bigger bullseye. And then some people feel like they're undeserving. And all of a sudden within like a couple days or a week, they're like training or they're like competing or rolling at a higher pace. And that's nothing changed, the color of your fabric around your waist. That's the only thing, but that's just such a perfect, reminder of like somebody believes in you, that you're a blue belt or a purple belt or whatever. And all of a sudden your skill level, and it's always more pressure, of course, like when you get a new belt, because now it's like, if you are a purple belt, you get submitted by a white belt. That's not good, or it doesn't feel good. Well, it doesn't feel as good as being a white belt getting submitted by a white belt, because there's different expectations.
Why? Yeah, see, but that's your own bullshit.
It is in some ways.
It's your own bullshit. I mean, it is. It's exactly that, because again, it's one of these things where, okay, because now what happens is, okay, like let's say if I go with a white belt and I'm a purple belt, white belts are a great opportunity for me to test out my new weapons. Like, all right,
Right.
I want to try to make my game better by doing new stuff with it, right? But then if I'm worried about losing to the white belt because I am perceived to be better than them, and then I beat myself up, that's a dumb thing. Because like for me, I get like when I'm trying stuff, I get passed, I get caught in submissions. Sometimes it happens. And again, I'm a black belt, and sometimes this happens to blue belts and purple belts and whomever in the gym, right?
Sure.
Who cares? Again, that's the rub. The rub is sort of assigning like a good or bad to something when it's not good or bad. It just is. And again, like, if you're working on something and, you're trying to play around with your game and you get submitted by something, who cares? Or if some white belt just catches you in something, who gives a shit, right? It happens sometimes. Like all of us have been caught by people that are perceived to be less skilled or less experienced or of less value on the mat than us. It isn't a bad or a good thing. It just is. And I think that's where people get in their way. Because I mean, again, this is one of the reasons why my game is I've shared this on the YouTube channel before, why my game in jiu-jitsu stalled at like late blue belt, early purple till I was pretty much a late brown belt. Because what happened is I was good and I valued being good and I valued being like one of the best guys in the gym, right? Under the coaches. And so I always wanted to win. That was always my focus was winning the rolls. That's all I was focused on. And so when I would roll with people, I never really played with anything new because if I played with something new, there was a chance that I wasn't going to do as well and I would lose to them. And that was a bad thing to me at the time. Big mistake because then my game stalled. So then when I was going into these brown belt tournaments and late purple belt tournaments, I didn't have the technical arsenal that a lot of people did. Because when you think about jiu-jitsu, a lot of times where we go up against people with different styles and different techniques and positions that they use. And so if we have you always have your main game plan, but then if you have these sort of auxiliary tools that you can use for different situations, it puts you in a better spot. Well, there were no auxiliary tools. It was like, I have my A game, and if that doesn't work, I'm screwed. I didn't have anything else, right?
Yeah.
Whereas now it's like, okay, I've got my A game, but if my A game doesn't work, I've got these things. These are the tertiary skills where I can like sort of play around with these different options, right? Didn't have it at the time. And so I remember my coaches coming up to me at the time. They're like, look, man, you got to expand your game. This is as a brown belt. They're like, you got to start playing with something else besides your main stuff because you're doing the same stuff over and over again and you're not getting any better, and you're having these trouble in competitions as a byproduct of it. And so I started playing around with different stuff. And my game initially did this dip where I was using positions that I wasn't as good with. People that I was beating in the gym on a regular basis were now getting the better of me in some cases and sometimes submitting me. And then after about 6 months to a year, it started to kind of creep its way back up and new weapons were in the game and I started feeling a lot better, but there was a dip there. And, but again, that's why you have to get broken of this idea of good or bad with like a submission or whatever. Like, again, strive to be better, put pressure on yourself to excel and push yourself to do as best you can. But at the same time, don't hang on to this idea of is like, oh man, I'm getting worse and I'm terrible and just beating yourself up over losing to someone or whatever, regardless of what rank they're at, because it's a crapshoot and it doesn't help anything. I mean, you can give yourself motivation. You can still be motivated to say, man, that son of a bitch got me yesterday. I'm gonna get him this time or whatever. And just be excited about the play. Right. Cause it happens all the time with me. Like I'll have guys where like, they'll catch me in something. All right, I'm going to get this guy in something, and, or, sometimes I'll put myself in positions like I'll have like, we got Matt who's got really good triangles and I'll put myself into a triangle choke so I can try to escape out of it and then try to fight my way out of it. And then sometimes he'll get me in it. Or even we've got another guy, Evan, who's got really good leg locks. And so I'll put myself in leg locks with him sometimes and see if I can slow down the submission and get better from it. But, yeah, so again, it's just I only know this because I've done it. I've been on both sides of the fence, and I can just and again, sometimes we can talk about these things and we can explain them to people, but I believe that ultimately it's something that you have to feel on a deep visceral level to really understand. But it's something that when I understood this, my jiu-jitsu got so much better because there wasn't any hindrance for techniques or for taking chances for things, and it allowed me to get much better.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think in jiu-jitsu specifically, if I look at, we talk about judging a book by its cover. I'll look at body types to make assumptions. Sometimes it doesn't ring true, but you talk about Matt, right? Matt's long-legged. He's really kind of like a thin, tall guy. You're just assume he's going to be good at triangles. So if you've never seen him before and you're meeting him at a tournament, you're going to assume probably that's a game he's going to play based on his body style. Shorter, stockier guy, maybe a wrestler. So I think maybe for me, that's a way that I could see, but it could also be a hindrance. But I'll look at people's body types and their physiques, and I'll use that to assume what their game is going to kind of pan out to be. What do you think? I mean, that's probably one of the main advantages I can think of as far as jiu-jitsu specifically. But
oh yeah, I mean, of course. I mean, you can look at people's bodies and generally have an idea. Not always though, because again, there's guys who completely break the molds on what things should be. So yeah, like a lot of times you look at tall, long-legged people, you can bet probably, like 7 times out of 10, they're probably going to be guard players who are going to try to go for triangles and things of that nature. Whereas if you see someone that's like short and stocky, most of the time you'll probably find that they are trying to be on top and trying to get to like side control and kimori you or arm lock you or something, but it's not always the case, right? There's a lot of times where you get surprised where you'll have that short stocky guy pull guard on you. You're like, what is going on here? So you just never know. Situations can always change, and so again, you just have to be ready for what comes. If as far as when you're rolling with someone, if you don't know what kind of game they have.
Yeah, and I think it can be helpful in some instances, but also in some instances it can hinder your game, and it can make you more put you like in a little avenue. You're not going to maybe be as open because you may assume they're doing certain things when they're not really. That's not their game.
Right, it's an attachment to things.
Yeah.
Right, you can't be too attached to those things, and you have to be flexible with what comes. Right, like even if you know a person's going to go for a particular type of game plan, or that they usually do, you should always be flexible. You shouldn't just simply expect that that's what they're going to do. Because there's times where I've gone into tournaments and like basically battle takedowns over and over and over again. And then I go up against the guy and I pull guard on him to change things up because I'm expecting him to expect me to go for a takedown. And so I'll go for a guard pull and throw him off. And then, I even had a guy one time I did this to, and he told me, he said, man, I thought I was expecting you to go for the takedown, so I was ready for it. And when I pulled guard, I threw him off balance. I came up for a sweep immediately because he was out of position.
Yeah, I think it can. Yeah, you can kind of use that to your advantage too in some instances. But yeah, I agree, man.
All right, guys. So thank you for listening to the podcast. Hopefully you got something from this episode today. Again, thanks to our sponsors, Charlotte's Web, charlottesweb.com. Promo code is Jiu-Jitsu for 15% off. EpicRollBJJ.com. Epic Roll BJJ is also making our Jiu-Jitsu rash guards coming up in shorts. So again, they're available now to order. So if you want to go to my website at jiu-jitsu.net, you can go in there and there will be a section where you can place your order. It's the same part of my website where you buy t-shirts and things like that. So if you want to do that, go ahead. For simplicity's sake, don't order your rash guard and shorts and t-shirts together because they'll have to be shipped differently because Matt will be shipping these rash guards out. But you can also go to Matt's website at epicrollbjj.com and you can order any of his gear for 15% off using the Jiu-Jitsu code. So Jiu-Jitsu at the checkout, and you'll save 15% on the order on his website. And then thanks to Paik at become-stronger.com. If you're looking for, anything like a mace or an odd object or a hammer, something that's got a different feel to it than a traditional like dumbbell or something like that, that is a versatile piece of equipment that you can use around your home or wherever you work out, you can go to his website and you can save 10% off on the order. So when you go to become-stronger.com, use a promo code Jiu-Jitsu and save 10% off one of his maces, other piece of equipment. If you'd like to support the podcast and get access to the additional content we have behind the paywall there on Patreon, you can go to patreon.com/the Jiu-Jitsu podcast and you can subscribe there. And then last, if you'd like to join my email newsletter and get 2 free Jiu-Jitsu ebooks, you can go to jiu-jitsu.net/join, JOIN. And I think that's it. Eugene, do you have anything else, buddy?
We got it, brother. That's it, man. Thank you guys for tuning in.
Appreciate you guys. We'll talk to you next week.